So there's this story of the Buddha being sick and during the night, and usually the kind of vulnerability of the Buddha is not emphasized in the suttas, in the recorded teachings. And so I always find it kind of touching when the Buddha is actually depicted in these very human ways, sick and at night. And one of his close monastic attendant monks is with him, and he asks, amidst this sickness, for the monk to call to mind and speak of the 7 factors of awakening. And the kind of sense that you get is it was a little bit like, hopefully this doesn't sound too infantilizing, but the Buddha kind of like wanting a bedtime story, except not Goodnight Moon, but the 7 factors. So he actually says, "O Kunda," this monk, let the factors of enlightenment occur to your mind, and then speak them to me. So elsewhere the Buddha said, I do not see even one thing that when developed and cultivated leads to the abandoning of the things that fetter so effectively as this, the 7 factors of enlightenment. And so tonight I actually wanted to pick up on one of those 7. This is reflecting a little bit on restlessness and anxiety and its counterpart, namely tranquility. So tranquility. This is important because it is so intense just being human. Right? I mean, tell me it's not just me. Like even when things are going really well, it's still intense being human. And we kind of like walk around like it's not such a big deal to be human. We're like kind of casual about the whole thing. I'm just, living my life, and I wear button-down shirts and I bathe, and no big deal, just living my life. But it's a big deal being human. And the world is like always touching us. This is one way of actually understanding what is meant by the First Noble Truth, that the world is like always impinging on us, even the eyes closed, but no, there's still sensation and sound, and there's the thought and feeling, and we're always being like impacted by the world. And there's a way in which it leaves us kind of like looking for some way to turn down the dial, like on the nervous system, really. And so it can feel, it can feel like a sort of blizzard, really. And now, in our distraction, we don't really we don't really see it. We're just actually propelled by the intensity of it. We don't actually know how intense it is to be alive until we pause deeply. But then we sit down and, as we do in this practice, and what we see is that something in us deeply longs for peace. You know, that maybe this is the highest good, in a sense. And sometimes it feels like, it's almost like our nervous system just like longing for the Dharma. Like how can I be at peace in this incarnation? And remarkably, even just a moment of it, just like a moment of peace can pierce an hour, a day, sometimes a lifetime of agitation and restlessness. It can feel so much like coming home. But usually, to manage the intensity of being human, we pile more intensity on top of intensity. It's like we chase intensity with more. We have a long, stressful day and we try to actually neutralize that intensity by adding more stimulation, more something, And, that kind of works. Like it's not, it kind of works. That's the thing about a lot of our not so helpful habits, is they kind of work, which makes them so much harder to let go, They kind of work. But when we actually do that, and I don't exempt myself from this, I have to, every time I'm a little internally stimulated by some boredom, I have to actively resist picking up my stupid smartphone, It's like, yeah. So our tendency is to is to really just kind of pile intensity upon intensity, and it kind of works, and it kind of leaves us feeling fragmented and feeling like we're a little bit on the run all the time. And so part of our path is developing tranquility, abiding in this, being nourished by it. And this is important because agitation and restlessness are very pervasive. And it's said that restlessness doesn't actually fade in the mind until we're really, really, quite deeply awakened. And I think when we look, we can actually see that so often we're subtly kind of waiting for something. The mind is sort of perched at the ledge of the present moment, but it's kind of, leaning forward, waiting for something to redeem the moment. And we can actually sense this in meditation, that we're, following the breath or attending to the body, And there's a certain way in which we're like waiting for the insight, or waiting for concentration to develop, or waiting for tranquility to arise, right? There's like this just, sometimes it's not a very obvious, sometimes it's very obvious, but sometimes it's a much more subtle energy of waiting. And in a certain sense, we can think of meditation practice as waiting for nothing. You know, we're no longer waiting for something. We're waiting for nothing. And it can even be helpful to reflect on what it would be like not to have a future. In the sense, not in the sense of reflecting on mortality or something like this, but just the sense of like how simple things would be if this were the only moment we were to live. If we weren't trying to somehow intervene and manipulate what's here for some other purpose, but instead we were just waiting for nothing. So it's said that that the path is you will often hear on the path, right? You're asked to open to experience, right? I asked you that like a bunch during the meditation. You know, open to your experience. Allow life in. Allow experience to come touch you in a way. And that is like a kind of core aspect of the practice and of the learning on this path. And yet, to try to open to experience when the mind is in a kind of like crispy place, right? When life is feeling actually too intense, when there's a lot of restlessness, that's actually, that's a lot to ask, to open, yeah. And that gesture of opening from a kind of a brittleness in the mind is that's problematic. You know, that's when meditation can feel like, oh, it's too much. It's too much that I'm being asked to open to. And then we can wind up actually like swimming in our internal material, marinating in it, rather than being mindful of it. And so I would say that when we're hyper-arousal, when the kind of nervous system is like idling, you know how a car idles at like 500 RPMs, but then maybe if you haven't started a car for a long time, or you're in a cold climate, it might idle much higher, you know. Our mind is like that in a lot of ways, and sometimes we're idling a little lower, and then sometimes we really actually are idling much higher. And that sense of being hyper-aroused, that sense of being like a little internally overwhelmed, actually, it changes how life feels in a deep way. It changes how we think about ourselves and the future. And so, and it changes how we can actually receive this moment when we're in a kind of hyper-aroused state. And so, Suzuki Roshi said, I think defined mindfulness at one point as a soft readiness. soft readiness. And you can see how that almost presupposes a certain level of tranquility, that actually to receive life, to receive experience, we need to be a little settled. We don't have to be totally calm, but a little settled. There's a story of from Jack. I think he was in a practice discussion, an interview with somebody on retreat, and she came in and she was like, I'm in this funny, something's going on. It's weird. I don't really know what's happening. And I think Jack sort of inquired, and they're like trying to figure it out, what's going on and what the problem is, how to solve it, or whatever. And then at some point there was like this realization in her, like, oh, you know what? I think I might know what it is. I'm calm. Right. Like, it doesn't always actually fully register. But when we really taste tranquility, the Buddha likened it to like, cool rain. This is Thomas Merton. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone in everything, is to succumb to the violence of our times. And so, here we let the silence work on us. And there's a certain way that I was joking about, sort of like enough sangha, right, as we're talking with each other, right? But sangha is actually the container. What we do together is so important actually for tranquility. Right? We all know the experience, the difference between meditating alone versus with people. And tranquility is kind of contagious, And we actually can lean on each other, especially when we're in this group, when we're in this container, when we're on retreat up the hill, if we do that, to actually lean on the stability and peace of others. And I often kind of remember when I was doing psychotherapy, and maybe somebody would come into the clinical room and be quite agitated, anxious, and that's kind of contagious too, right? But if I could stay grounded and not be propelled into this mode where I actually had this sense of like, oh, I need to actually solve everything here, I need to resolve this, I could actually just sort of welcome that individual into my mind, like allow them to actually essentially like be mindful for them in a way, like just to offer my own the stability and tranquility. And if I didn't get, if I could be aware myself and not get caught up in the kind of intensity of the moment, then they too would actually, they could kind of like ride on my tranquility. And I think this happens often in sangha. We can actually lean on each other. And so maybe we Thich Nhat Hanh says, if you're feeling agitated and angry and, like it just feels like more than you can handle, sit with a friend. Like just like meditate next to one another and just lean on the stability of the other. Now, it's said that that in these 7 factors of mindfulness and investigation, energy, rapture, like intense joy, tranquility, samadhi, concentration, equanimity. It's said that these sort of lead to one another. They unfold from one another, although it's often not very linear. But you notice that rapture or joy is what actually precedes tranquility. And normally we think of like, okay, I'm going to get calm or I'm going to get concentrated, and then I'll be happy, right? But what this is actually pointing to is the reverse, that we actually find some joy in this moment. And this actually, the mind and its tendency to go kind of like foraging for something starts to fade. As there's some joy, some pleasure in the mind, we actually stop leaning into the future so much. We can actually just be satiated, be content. And this then can unfold into more and more tranquility. Now, as far as formal meditation, like there are, I would say, some anchors of attention that actually seem to be more closely associated with tranquility. So for some people, the breath is maybe actually linked to some anxiety. And I've heard Jack sort of estimate, like maybe 1 in 5 people, the breath may not be the best object of focus. But that you may find that. But for a lot of people, really attending to the exhalation and the kind of ripple, sometimes very obvious, but sometimes kind of subtle, the ripple of relaxation across the body with the exhale. And usually in meditation, we don't talk so much about manipulating the breath. We just say breathe normally. But there are some teachers who actually encourage you to experiment with breathing in certain ways that actually induces some tranquility. And so we can actually experiment with how we attend with sort of following the breath, and it can almost feel like the whole body is breathing. Sometimes the internal, it can get intense in a way in the internal system here, and can be very good to sort of anchor the attention in the visual field. Now, in general, when we're looking, we're not mindful of looking. Like, of all of the senses, in a certain way, mindfulness of seeing it's only a stone's throw away, but it can feel very new. There's a difference between seeing and knowing we're seeing. And the visual field can be like actually knowing that we're seeing, not just seeing, but knowing that we're seeing, namely mindfulness of sight, can be very helpful when the internal world feels like we're swimming, marinating in something. And so we can actually scan the visual field, and you may find that there's something to look at that feels vaguely soothing or maybe pleasant. And you can actually just rest the attention there. Now, this is not like this is not the pleasant of like double chocolate chip ice cream, but we got to take what we can, in meditation. So it's like, it may be kind of subtle, but you may just sense like, oh yeah, the red of the carpet is somehow more soothing than the tan, and you just kind of rest and anchored in the visual field. Sometimes I'll actually listen for like the most distant sounds and really attend to the fading away of sound. Naturally, the attention will go to what's most intense and loudest, and be more attentive to the arising of sounds than the fading away. But we can actually also attend to like, what can we just barely hear? And can we listen to it fading out? And we just follow that fade into some peace, some tranquility. It's helpful often to have to be doing some mental noting, which many of you are likely familiar with. And generally this is just silently whispering a word to keep track of experience in our own mind. So when we're doing, we might make the note breathing in, breathing out. And in general, we're noting very simple kind of experiences, and it's best done in a very gentle, matter-of-fact tone of voice. You may be like freaking out, right? The mind may be like, whatever, right? But just the continuity of that like gentle mental noting, just stay with it. Yeah. And in general, as I was saying, like we just note very discrete sensory experiences, but sometimes it can be good to note like a whole mind state, the whole gestalt of what's going on. And I can let you in on one particular mental note that is very often forgotten, but can be quite helpful. And that note is, I'm having a meltdown. We don't know that we're having a meltdown when we're having a meltdown. That is, we know things are like intense and unpleasant, but it hasn't actually fully registered as a meltdown. Does that make sense? It hasn't actually like, we're so absorbed in the content of the story and the way that we're understanding everything that we haven't recognized like, oh, this is a meltdown. And there's something actually about, who's been on retreat, either here or silent retreat, residential retreat? Yeah. You know this, right? Like, the meltdown kind of sneaks up on you. And all of a sudden, like, everything feels like wrong, and it's just like, how do I get, like the universe is off its rails somehow. And then because we're actually staying with practice and we just keep going, keep showing up, we actually see the whole like house of cards that like was the foundation for that meltdown. Like that collapses. And it's not like we think, oh, everything was totally fine, but that sense of like the grip of like the frenzied, agitated meltdown experience, that actually changes. And we get to see how our own minds were participating in that. And it can actually knowing, like truly knowing with mindfulness that we are having a meltdown when we're having it is very helpful. Because it introduces a certain kind of space, right? And the meltdown is real, but there's something else that is also true. Namely, there is this awareness of it. And just that very subtle gesture is a cause of more tranquility. So as we practice, we can look into like this urge to make something happen, to make a concentration happen, to make insight happen, to get somewhere, to get enlightenment, right? When we're wanting a donut during meditation, for example, or a cookie. Let's use cookie. Wanting a cookie, we kind of know, like that's, if we've been hanging around the meditation scene for a while, we know kind of like, all right, let go of the cookie, right? But when we're wanting concentration, it doesn't fully register as just another species of greed. It feels like, oh, this is dignified, The cookie, I gotta let go of that. But the craving for my mind to be concentrated right now, that's fine, right? But no, it's the same texture of craving. Cookie, concentration. The craving that is made of the same stuff. So we let go. We let go. Ajahn Sumedho, would, and this is through my time with Ajahn Amaro. Sumedho would talk often about. He would talk about being enlightened rather than becoming enlightened, And so he says, it's not about doing something now to become enlightened in the future. This is totally wrong. This kind of thinking is bound up with self and time. Be awake now. Be enlightened to the present moment. Now, we can watch the ways, the kind of cycles of becoming, our attempts to manufacture something. Our attempts to manufacture the next moment, to bring something into being. And we relax. We just relax. It's so tempting to make meditation a kind of another dimension of our grand self-improvement project. Like we turn ourselves into a kind of self-improvement project. And there's some allure to that, But we actually really want to let ourselves be. Like what would it mean to like really just leave yourself alone? Just like don't make anything of yourself. Don't try to become anything. Just let's just leave ourselves alone. Now, this tranquility is also very closely related to these teachings on selflessness. As we get more quiet, more settled, the self becomes more and more vague. In our agitation, it's like we're constantly reminding ourselves who we are, where we are, what we're to become, what's here, what's the future, what's the past. It's like we have all these reference points, and we're continually like locating ourselves with these reference points. And as we get more and more settled, more and more calm, more and more tranquil, it's like the self starts to become more vague. Like the boundaries between me and you starts to become more vague. The sense of like that there's something, someone, some center point inside me. Like that becomes more vague too. The neuroscientist Bruce Hood writes, "Each morning we wake up and experience a rich explosion of consciousness, the bright morning sunlight, the smell of coffee. As the slumber recedes into the night, we awake to become who we are. The morning haze of dreams and oblivion disperses, and lifts as recognition and recall bubble up the content of our memories into consciousness. For the briefest of moments, we are not sure who we are. And then suddenly, I, the one that is awake, awakens. We gather our thoughts so that the I who is conscious becomes the me, the person with a past. The memories of the previous day return, plans for the future reformulate. We glance at the mirror. We take a moment to reflect. This is who we are." Now, as we settle, as we get more quiet, that sense, that brief moment that Hood is alluding to, when we don't, maybe it's when we just wake up. We don't quite know who we are. It's like we have to remind ourselves that the I is the me, the I, that this consciousness belongs to that person with the past. But the tranquility actually helps us become more and more vague. It maybe expands the time when we forget the self, or the self gets less, at least less solid. We're not all invested in being this or being that, in proving this about ourselves. It's just very quiet. Now, Aristotle asked the question, like, what is the highest good, the good to which all other goods are aimed? And he had his answer, and the Buddha had his own. The Buddha really said the highest happiness is peace. And that's not to dismiss lots of other beautiful kind of mind states, but peace, and tranquility leading to peace, has a kind of revered place in Buddhist, the Buddhist path. I was here in this hall, this is now, I don't know, it might be close to 10 years ago, and it was a day long on love, and it was great. It was taught by a couple dear people, friends, and it was everything, all about love. Everything was about love. And towards the end of the day, we did this thing where it's called a tunnel of kindness. And so this is what it was. It was like maybe 100 or 150 people here. We're not going to do this, by the way, but we all lined up. We lined up right here, like maybe 6 feet away from one another. And so it was like 75 people here, 75 people here, looking at one another. And then in this tunnel, each person got blindfolded one by one, peeled off the end of the tunnel, and walked down the tunnel. And each person along the sides of the tunnel, one by one, would whisper something quietly into their ear, right? And, I remember this one woman walking down, she was sitting right in front of me during the day, and I could just kind of sense that she was really connecting with the practice. And I remember I whispered into her ear, I think you're falling in love with the Dharma. And she just squeals with delight, right? And then eventually it's my turn to walk down, and I walk down, and some people said just pretty generic things, may you be happy, or so, but some people were weirdly perceptive in knowing my joy and my neurosis, and they made very precise recommendations to me, and that were a lot of them were really resonant, yeah. So this is going on for an hour, right? And it is a frenzy of love in the room. It was beautiful. It was you couldn't really imagine a kind of space more deeply pervaded by the intensity of love and care. And as beautiful as it was, and as cherished and as valued as that love has in the practice and in my own mind and heart, there's something that longed just for peace. And what we can sometimes see is that that peace is the only thing that doesn't fatigue the heart. That anything else actually can, if it goes on for too long or at a sufficient intensity, it can fatigue the heart. Even the most beautiful things, such as love. But peace, that is, it's like the nervous system is is finally at rest. And when there's peace, we don't actually have to look for joy or love or anything, actually. The moment is utterly complete. So we have time for a few questions, if there are any. We'll pass a mic around. And no need to ask just because nobody else is, by the way. Like I have a very, I guess I'm breaking it, but I have a high threshold for awkward silence. So it's like a occupational hazard. You guys stonewall me.
So I'm going to stonewall you.
Oh, we got a question. Okay, hey.
Hey. So thank you, Matthew. This is a talk that I really needed to hear. In meditation this evening, I was really aware of anticipation. And then I was like, oh, let me look at this a little bit. What's it feel like? And it's really up here. The anticipation is really in my head.
Yeah.
And I sat with it a little bit more. I was like, oh, it's actually just anxiousness. It's just anxiousness. It's restlessness. And then the reflection of, okay, so let's see what this is about. And looking a little bit deeper and just, this is kind of, that's how I run.
Yeah.
It's how I operate in the world. And then when you mentioned the breakdown, like I'm having a meltdown.
Yeah.
I smiled because I realized, actually, I didn't realize it at the time. So here we go. It's like, okay, so I realized, oh, I had a meltdown today.
Yeah.
Like technology failed and I
Yeah.
hadn't had anything to eat. And I just, my husband who works in the office outside of our house, I was like, I need your help right now. And it was just like I had a full meltdown.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me and he said, you need to sit down and take a breath and eat. And even though I knew that's exactly what I needed to do.
Right.
I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Like I didn't do that. And so my question, or just even a practice tip or something, like some jewel.
Yeah.
I have a lot of practice in this body of mine, and I've been doing this practice a long time, yet I still go and have that meltdown.
Yeah.
And I still know what to do, yet I don't choose it.
Yeah.
I don't choose. And just to see and hear you talk about it, it's like, oh yeah, and I didn't choose it.
Yeah.
Like, because there is that, I don't know what gets in the way of choosing it.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you could speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think what it is, you probably sensed, like maybe not totally consciously, but you probably sensed if you did sit down in that moment, you would be walloped by a kind of wave of unpleasantness, actually. And so it's like the mind, and this is the mind, like gets a subtle hit of that, and it's like, no. And I sort of the image I have is like cartoon characters of like cartoon characters like running really fast, but they're like, there's like an anvil attached to them, and there's like a rubber band, like like a rubber band attached to their waist and an anvil. I don't know where I get this stuff, but like. This is the image I have when I'm like on the run, kind of, and I know if I stop, the elastic band like right? And we are anticipating that impact, and and sometimes we get intimidated by it, and the truth is it probably will be intense for a moment, but sometimes it actually, we like, if we can just be with it for just a moment, it actually starts to unfold, and there's like something in the heart that that really relaxes when we like come back into balance, even though there is the impact, there is the aversive aspect of the experience. There's something like, okay, this hurts, but it really hurt being on the run, you know. And there's definitely a place for movement. There's a place for like lying down. There's a place for, you know, like actual physical gestures of some soothing, like hand to face or heart, or doing some mindful movement or something. And you know, sometimes we're just not, you know, there. This practice is humbling, you know. And part of why it's humbling is because there are moments when we know we need to let go and we can't, you know. And sometimes in those moments, like how the mind picks up and relates to those moments is important, you know. Because for some people, that's a moment of shame, or it's like, or we try to like, we actually get even more harsh with ourselves to like try to rally in a way, because the feeling of being helpless in the face of our own dukkha, own suffering, the helplessness is about the most aversive experience we can have. And every once in a while, I try in those moments, and those moments can come up. It doesn't have to be like grand, big moments. That can happen just when we want another, you know, dessert or something. Like, and we don't want to take it, and we do, and then we do, and you know, like this sense, like, oh, I need to let go, but I can't. Like, it can be very small examples. I don't want to say this to my partner, but we do. Like those moments, sometimes we can actually take that moment of helplessness into the heart and actually let it become the seed for motivation to practice more. I'm gonna suffer now. There's nothing I can do actually right now. But I'm going to actually use this moment to consolidate my wish to wake up. Yeah. I can't. It's like we're backed into like this karmic corner, and we can't find our way out right now. But I want to use this moment. You know, I'm going to let, and it hurts, but it's like I'm going to let this burn into my heart a little. And that does become a powerful, that's a way of using the sense of helplessness as a way of spurring more practice. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's just sit for a moment. Whatever goodness you can sense in this room, in the sangha, in this lineage of Dharma. May that goodness resonate with the goodness inside you. May our efforts here together tonight, may this be a cause small or dramatic for less suffering, more joy, more peace in ourselves and those we encounter. Thank you. Before we go, what should I talk about next week? I can't promise that I can take the request, but...
I like the restlessness, but I think that maybe some pain. I know we talked about
Pain.
when I have pain. I think some pain, because for me it was really hard. This is my first time meditating. It's my first time here, and I have chronic pain. I have bad back, and it was really hard to learn how to do this with that constantly being there.
Yeah.
For a place to find, to push that out of that space.
Thank you.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, other thoughts? Yeah.
Don't you take it upon yourself to do all the factors of enlightenment over the course of the next year or decade or however long it takes?
Okay. Yeah.
I'd like to do something with love.
Love. Yeah. What's that? The tunnel. You want to do the tunnel? Yeah. I'm not authorized. My empowerment is not. I don't have the tunnel empowerment. Okay. I'll do something next week. Anyway, I wish you a good week. Thanks.